Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Patty Porter. My guest hosts, Dina Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening.
Recently released, Being Relational, The 7 Ways to Quality Interaction and Lasting Change by Louise Senfts and William Senfts details 7 ways of being in relation to others that capture the heart and soul of all that is self-help, grounded in method and supported by relational conflict theory and brain science findings. The ways of being that promote quality face-to-face dialogue and lasting positive change are rooted in teachings from many sources and are also inspired by the experience of thousands of people for whom Louise and William have mediated, fostering personal strength and connectedness through quality interaction. In today's program, Louise and William will share insights into their practical and inspiring approach that the listeners can immediately apply to their stressful interactions, as well as check in on and grow into as a way of being in relation to others. Hello, I'm your guest host, Stephen Kotev, and joining us today for our program entitled Change the Interaction, Change the Outcome is Louise Senfts and William Senfts. Baltimore residents Louise Senfts and William Senfts are business and law professors, mediators, lawyers, entrepreneurs, parents of 5 children, and in William's case, youth sports coach and clergy. In their many years of experience at their firm, Baltimore Mediation, Louise and William have gained a unique perspective on the ways that leaders and others manage conflict, experience conflict, manage themselves in conflict, solve problems, build relationships, and make their way in the world. They are founders of the nonprofit ORANS, the Campaign for Relational Leadership, and ORANS Institute for Relational Leadership, which were created for the purpose of developing leaders who will transform stressful interactions with quality dialogue to create lasting positive change in their daily negotiations, organizations, families, and communities. Welcome to the program, Louise and Bill.
Thank you, Stephen. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Stephen. Wonderful to join you.
Well, we're really very pleased to have you, and you're co-authors of this new book, and you're founders of the ORANS Institute for Relational Leadership. And as a married couple, I'm very curious about how long you two have been in partnership together in these business endeavors. You've got 5 kids, you've got all these other things, and you're in business together. How long have you been doing that, you two?
Well, for us, we just last week celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary, and for us as partners, we've really been partners in everything for those full 31 years, the many chapters of our lives, and the last couple decades as business partners.
Well, congratulations. 31 years is a wonderful accomplishment, so I hope you two are going to go do something fun to celebrate.
Thank you. We did. We always do. Taking time out for ritual and celebration is actually quite key, especially in the field of conflict transformation.
So the title of your book is Being Relational, The 7 Ways to Quality Interaction and Lasting Change. So why don't you give our listeners a little insight to what these 7 ways are and what led you to discover them?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. The 7 ways come from ways of being that we have witnessed in mediation that help people resolve conflicts and work things out. So they talk about issues that people deal with in finding solutions and the approach that they take in dealing with other people. So that's in a nutshell, it can be boiled down to two approaches that we have identified. One is a relational approach, which really focuses on maximizing the outcome for yourself and for the other person, versus a transactional approach, which really looks at only maximizing the outcome for yourself. And so we are urging a relational approach that has 7 ways of achieving that.
So let me see if I'm following you. Oh, go ahead, Louise.
Well, no, I would add to that one of the pieces for Bill and for me in writing the book over the last 3 years have been the inspiration of other great thinking and writing of others. And so what we found is that some of our favorite authors and writers and practitioners really defined beautifully an aspect that we found moving and meaningful, but we found that it was a piece of a whole. And so we wanted to integrate what we had found and put into a system. And so that's also where the 7 ways had come from. So we had our experience and then really the experience of others that helped to really, for us, inspire us and then inform our thinking and our writing that we've put in the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you've basically taken a lot of your experience and the observations that you've gotten in from helping all these folks, but also it sounds like from your work as being professors and in business and parenting, and you've sort of seen 2 different ways that folks have interacted. One is this relational way, which sounds like I get something out of this and you get something out of this, and we're trying to help each other, versus I'm only trying to get what I want, which is that transactional end. So it's the relational versus transactional. And if I understand you folks correctly, it's the relational end of things that you really find very powerful and what you've focused your book on. Is that right?
Yes, and that's where you get to the lasting change piece, because we really do believe that a relational approach leads to lasting positive change, not change that falls apart, like, literally right outside of the room when people make an agreement, or in political realm, in the next election cycle. So the ways that we talk about of being relational fall into 2 categories. One is focused on how you interact with somebody in quality dialogue. What makes quality interaction? And we identify being engaged, being centered, being grounded, and being clear. And then the second aspect of being relational are 3 additional ways of being that really focus on creating lasting change. And they're being generous, being humble, and being kind. So those are the 7 ways that we talk about that we think really fully cover what it means to be relational.
And those pieces that Bill just mentioned, the 7 ways, one of the overarching concepts for being relational is really to take a look at and to understand who you are. Because so much of your own worldview and your belief system and who you are, that's what affects the quality of interaction. It's not just a skill set, although we certainly believe in a skill set that's very relational. But there's this aspect of engagement around your own understanding yourself and your own personal reactivity and how it is that you use your power, how it is that you are aware of different power currencies, especially when things are difficult. And we would go so far, and we believe deeply that it's possible to be relational even with an enemy, right? Could be somebody whom you think is against you or somebody whom you believe does not have your best interest at heart. But the quality of being relational, even with the bully. For instance, we would say that you don't stand up to the bully, you sit down with the bully and you engage in face-to-face quality dialogue. So aspects of this, of what it means to be relational, are very much threaded throughout the book in each of the very separate 7 ways of being.
Mm-hmm. And when I listen to you, it sounds like it's more than a strategy. That what you're really pushing for is something that folks try to integrate into how they handle themselves. So it's not, okay, I've got this tough commercial business negotiation I got to deal with, or I'm trying to go and get more money out of my raise, or during my conversation about a promotion. It's about, you talk about being generous, you're talking about being centered, you're talking about being grounded, but it's a very different way of looking at the world and interacting with it. Is that right?
Stephen, that's really, you nailed it right there with that idea. And at the end of the day, it comes from this concept that, you're connected to other people and that their well-being has importance. And so if you're only focused on your own outcome, then really the other person's well-being is trampled. And so some of the ideas of being relational aren't about winning. And so in many cases, when you see literature about negotiation and conflict resolution, you see a lot of strategic advice about how to win. And really, this is not about necessarily winning in the sense of creating your maximum outcome. It's about trying to maximize well-being for yourself and for the other person.
So, this is interesting because, we had, I think it's been around for a while, but the concept of like 6 degrees of separation, or, what goes around comes around. There's a couple other ones that I don't remember off the top of my head, but this idea that you're no longer, with things like the internet, you're no longer in this isolated area. That in many circumstances, whatever the decisions you make it's not like the impact doesn't exist. There is some impact to it. And instead of denying that, it sounds like you folks are embracing it and saying, well, why don't we see what we can do to help other folks, as opposed to, well, I got what I want and who cares about you. Is that right?
Absolutely. There is a quality when for those who see the difference and also say being relational is good. I want that. It's because they're aware of what would be seen as a systems way of thinking, that no longer is it just 2 people. There are, as you mentioned, outcomes of the interaction between just 2, and yet knowing that there's something more important than just the 2 people in this interaction, or the 10 people, or the 200 people, or the nation-to-nation interaction. It's still about the quality of that interaction. So even for each of us as individual peoples, we can have the kind of effect on a larger measure of society by choosing to interact in a relational way in everything that we do. And it might seem lofty or too aspirational, but from getting up in the morning and driving to work or transportation, and how it is that you interact with strangers, and how it is that you interact with your family, get to work, all these qualities of being relational with regard to increasing capacity are something that we're hoping to really instill.
So I'd like to remind our listeners that they're listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program with your guest host, myself, Stephen Kotev. Today I'm joined by Louise Senfts and William Senfts, and we are discussing change the interaction, change the outcome. So one of the things I always like to do when I have such talented and wise folks like yourself on the program is get specific, and in getting specific, look for practical advice. So I was thinking, why don't we take a look at the concept of being grounded, which is one of the 7 ways. One of the things that what I'm curious about here is what's the problem in thinking that someone or something will always be a certain way or never will change? You've focused around that concept of being grounded.
Yes, I'd like to give you some information about that would hopefully will be helpful. when being grounded, you are really looking at your thinking and how you're thinking about the situations and people in your life might create problems for you, which ultimately creates problems for them too. And when you get stuck in a rut of thinking that somebody can't change or will always be a certain way, then you close down your openness to the ability to see them in any different way. And really what you do is ultimately deceive yourself, because you're not able to see the truth of the person who you're dealing with, because people do change, things change, and your ability to recognize that virtually everything is temporary allows you to be open to accepting new directions for people that you're dealing with. And that changes the way you interact with them, so that if you approach each interaction with someone with that openness that something might be different in this go-round with them, then oftentimes you'll find that shifts will occur, and they might take time, but if you're open, then they're much more likely to happen than if you're closed and you're thinking that this is always going to be a certain way or that it will never change.
And I would add to that as well that as Phil mentioned, we're always thinking, the rut that our thinking puts us all in, it's an aspect of humanity. What tends to happen when we are close to others is that they become close to us. So it's a double negative. And we know this work now in our work is transformed as mediators. It's now shown in science, it's physics. And if you look at it from a wellness and trying to create well-being perspective, it creates incredible suffering. And so much of our own thinking that is in that rut and that is in never, she will never, he will always be this way, that creates suffering for us. We create so much of our own suffering. So
and
changing your
Louise, I think we're hitting some.
Is that true? Being able to ask, what is real reality? Is it true that someone will never change? Is it true that they always do that? And even in that pause, in that moment, we oftentimes will find, as Bill mentioned, there will be a shift because there's a sliver of an opening for something else that could happen, some other kind of possibility. And that actually is the opening that does the last change. So the quality of the interaction actually leads to a different kind of activity that is an outcome of that.
And Louise, I think we may have encountered a bit of a technical difficulty because as you started to speak, you were in clear, and now you've faded out a bit. So it was pretty hard for me to make out everything that you said. The gist of it, as I got it, was that it was how you interacted with folks would also change the dynamics between each other, and within that could cause things to, for the people who have that sort of like this is never going to change attitude, they're essentially stuck as well. The person who they think isn't going to change, that person is stuck as well, and that kind of creates problems for them later on.
That's it exactly, and then
okay.
I had also mentioned that it creates so much of our own suffering.
Right.
So what we blame others for, because they will never, right, or they are always, we ourselves are creating so much suffering that we don't have to experience if we stay grounded in reality, looking at, is that true? And if you follow it out, that people are always this or they will never do that, we'll find that there's a little opening, a sliver of opening. And when you follow that opening and being grounded, you can have all kinds of outcomes that you would have never otherwise imagined. Bill mentioned shifts. You also have action that people will take that lead to lasting change in ways that others would never have imagined, because they engage in a way that is centered but grounded in reality. Their thinking is different.
Great.
And Bill might want to add to that too.
Well, I'm still getting a little bit of feedback from you. You're much easier to hear, but there was a little bit of an echo coming through. So, Bill, I'd be more than happy to have you chime in.
Yes. So, as Louise was mentioning, I think a lot of it is a situation where your being closed to the other person affects their ability to be open with you too. So it has this reciprocal kind of quality to it. Mm-hmm. So when you're closed, they're more likely to be closed. When you're open, they're more likely to be open. And that can make a huge difference in the quality of your interaction. So change that thinking, you can change the outcome of the conversation that you're having just by going in with a different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really, really insightful. And now I'm curious about the concept of being clear. You know, how do you handle circumstances where you're trying to decide whether or not to share some information that you think maybe would really upset or disturb somebody? So, you know, you want to be clear, but you're afraid if you tell them what you really think, it's going to make things worse. You know, how do folks approach a situation like that?
So in being clear, the concept is about transparency, about how you share information. And so what we really look at fundamentally in being clear is what information would the other side want to have? And if you were in their shoes, what information would be helpful? And so sometimes you have information that the other side doesn't have and might affect them negatively, but still it's something that you know that you really think that they would want to know. And so our approach, a relational approach, we would say, is to disclose that information. And you know, that calls upon you in many cases to be humble and to also be kind with how you do that, because it can be a situation that's quite difficult, particularly if the information that you're sharing is something that's difficult for the other side to hear.
And if we weave in, for instance, back to being grounded or being centered, it could also be that the information, you might think that it's difficult for the other, but we've seen all too often in our work as transformative mediators that it can be the very information that's a relief to the other person or the other entity or the other group of peoples, because now they know. There was something that they had been suspicious about, they wondered about, or they were feeling blindsided by, and now they know, as difficult as it might be. And that unto itself is another outcome of being relational. You don't know what can happen, and even some of the assumptions that you would make about not wanting to hurt someone, as you had mentioned, Stephen, or something that might be disturbing or difficult. Maybe, and maybe not. So, which takes us back to a quality of being grounded.
Well, and also as I was listening to Bill, it sounds like they're interconnected in that you need, there's this encouragement to be clear and to say what you need to say, but you need to be generous and kind as you do it. So it sounds like your 7 ways complement each other or fit together.
Absolutely. You're right on with that understanding. And so when we talk about 7 ways of being relational, we don't look at it as 7 ways or 7 steps. It's all things at once. I mean, it's who you are. And so at the end of the day, the idea is that being relational is not a way that you act. It's not a strategy that you employ. It's about who you are, authentically as, the person who you genuinely are. And so it's all those things at once. And if you are generous and kind and humble, then your being clear is a lot more relational than it might be if you're not those things.
Hmm. Well, as we start to wrap the show up, one of the things I'm wondering is, what type of assignment would you have for our listeners as how they can engage with what we've discussed today further?
I would challenge your listeners to think of a situation that they're having a difficult time with another person and say, how could it be different? How can I change the interaction? Maybe I am sharing information that I haven't shared before. Maybe I am being more open in the way that I see them and my thinking about them. Maybe I am just engaging with them and being able to sit and talk and not stonewall and not hide behind email or not pick up the phone when they call. So think about that difficult interaction that they're having and say, how can I change the interaction in a relational way and see if I can achieve a different outcome?
That's a wonderful challenge. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm intrigued, and I certainly feel our listeners are. So, Louise and Bill, how can folks find you? When's your book coming out? I believe it's already out now, but, tell us a bit more about how we can find you, how they can get in contact with you, all that good stuff.
So you can reach us. You can take a look at beingrelational.com, which has some information about the book. And we have our existing business, which is baltimoremediation.com, which provides a lot of information about our mediation and conflict resolution work, as well as our blog about all kinds of different topics. And we're in the process of launching the Oren website in the next week or so keep an eye out for those at joinorens.org. Louise can speak to you a little bit about when the book's coming out and how to get that. It is available.
It is. We're tickled. It will be launched September 1 by HCI, and from now until then, pre-orders can be put in through Amazon and through Barnes & Noble. And in terms of how it is that you can reach us, as Bill mentioned, through both of the websites, be looking for Orange. Orange is an image that means to be open and be relational. And so the idea of having a campaign to be able to really further what it means to be relational is something that people hopefully will benefit from. They can keep an eye on that in the future.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for your insights. What closing thoughts would you like to share with our listeners?
Well, our challenge is very simple. Just we would say to your listeners, think about how you interact with others. Are you transactional or are you relational? And it only takes one person to change the interaction. That person can be you.
Well, thank you so much. That's wonderful thoughts, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connections or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.